The day my parents disowned me, they didn't yell, they didn't argue, they didn't even ask questions. They just believed him. My older brother Ethan stood in the living room holding a stack of printed bank statements and said, "She transferred money from Grandma's account before she died." My mother gasped like I had stabbed her. My father didn't look at me at all. I remember the ticking clock on the wall being louder than my own heartbeat. "I didn't take anything," I said, my voice shaking but steady enough to be clear. Ethan didn't even look nervous. He looked prepared. "The transfer happened the week she was in hospice," he continued. "Only Laura had access to her paperwork." That part was true. I handled Grandma's hospital forms because I was the only one organized enough to do it. But access is not guilt. I kept saying, "Check the timestamps. Check the authorization." I didn't do this, but they never asked to see my evidence. My father finally spoke, his voice colder than I had ever heard it. "If you needed money, you could have asked. Instead, you stole from your dying grandmother." That sentence ended my place in that house. I packed my bags that night in silence. My law school acceptance letter sat on my desk, unopened since the argument started. I slipped it into my bag like it was my last piece of identity. My mother stood in the doorway but didn't stop me. Ethan watched from the hallway, his expression unreadable. I later learned he had secretly borrowed against Grandma's small savings account to cover losses from a risky startup investment. When Grandma passed, the missing funds would have been exposed unless someone else took the blame first. I was the easiest target, the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who wouldn't fight publicly. The first year alone was brutal. Law school was demanding, competitive, relentless. I worked evenings at a bookstore to pay rent. I skipped meals. I avoided social media because every family photo hurt too much. When classmates talked about going home for holidays, I pretended I preferred staying on campus. During one late-night study session, my friend Maya asked softly, "Why don't you talk to your parents?" I stared at my casebook and said, "They already decided who I am." That sentence tasted bitter. But instead of collapsing, I focused. I studied estate law obsessively, fraud statutes, financial misconduct, probate disputes. Somewhere inside me, I think I wanted to understand exactly how the lie worked and how to dismantle lies like it. 3 years later, I graduated near the top of my class. There was no family in the audience, no flowers waiting outside, just Maya and a cheap bottle of champagne. I joined a mid-sized law firm specializing in property and financial litigation. I built a reputation for being meticulous and unshakable in court. Judges respected preparation. Opposing counsel learned not to underestimate me. I never told colleagues about my family situation. I let my work speak for me. Over time, cases grew larger, clients more desperate. I became the attorney people called when something had gone very wrong. Meanwhile, back home, Ethan's startup collapsed entirely. He borrowed heavily against my parents' home to stay afloat. They trusted him. They always had. When the business failed, creditors came knocking. But pride kept them silent. They never reached out to me. 5 years passed like that in parallel lives that never touched. Then one Thursday afternoon, my assistant knocked on my office door. "There's a foreclosure emergency consult asking specifically for you," she said. "They said your name was recommended by the county clerk." I glanced at the file she handed me and felt my breath catch. The property address was my childhood home. I stared at the names listed, Robert and Elaine Mitchell, my parents. For a long moment, I considered refusing. There were other attorneys at the firm. I could have passed the case quietly. But something inside me, not revenge, not anger, something steadier said, "Face this." I told my assistant to schedule them for the next morning. When they walked into the conference room, they didn't recognize me at first. Professional suits and time change people. Then my mother froze mid-step. "Laura?" she whispered. My father's face drained of color. They looked older, smaller. The confidence I remembered was gone. I stayed seated, composed. "Please have a seat," I said, my voice neutral. They obeyed without argument. The file told most of the story. Unpaid business loans, second mortgage defaults, a foreclosure notice within 30 days. Ethan had disappeared months earlier, leaving them legally exposed. My father finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "We didn't know this firm was yours." I replied calmly, "It isn't. I work here." Silence filled the room like thick fog. My mother's eyes welled with tears. "Laura, about what happened years ago," I raised a hand gently. "We can discuss personal matters later. Right now, we need to focus on preventing foreclosure." It wasn't coldness. It was boundaries. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked relentlessly on their case. I reviewed loan documents, identified predatory clauses, negotiated temporary stays, and filed motions challenging the acceleration terms of the mortgage. At one tense meeting with the bank's legal team, their senior counsel said, "Your clients signed willingly." I responded evenly. "They signed under materially misleading representations by a Cobra wire whose financial disclosures were falsified." I didn't mention Ethan by name yet. Strategy first, emotion later. Late one evening, while preparing evidence, my mother called my office line. "Why are you helping us?" she asked, her voice trembling. I paused before answering. "Because I don't need you to admit I'm innocent in order to know I am." There was quiet crying on the other end. "We were wrong," she whispered. "We found documents last month. Transfers Ethan authorized. It wasn't you." My grip tightened on the phone. "I know," I said softly. "I always knew." The court hearing was packed with tension. The judge reviewed our filings carefully. I presented evidence of fraudulent misrepresentation by Ethan and demonstrated that my parents had limited knowledge of the loan restructuring. I requested loan modification under hardship protection statutes. After what felt like endless minutes, the judge granted a temporary injunction against foreclosure and ordered mediation. My parents' house was safe for now. Outside the courtroom, my father finally faced me fully. "I should have asked you for your side," he said, his voice breaking. I chose the easier answer. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized something surprising. I wasn't angry anymore. "You chose the son you understood over the daughter you underestimated," I replied calmly. It wasn't cruel. It was true. Ethan resurfaced briefly when legal notices reached him. He called me once. "You're really taking their side?" he scoffed. I answered evenly, "I'm taking the side of the truth." He hung up. Mediation resulted in a structured repayment plan and partial debt forgiveness after we demonstrated lender negligence in due diligence. The house was no longer at risk. My parents tried to hug me afterward. I allowed it, but gently. Reconciliation is not instant. Trust rebuilds slower than property cases. The real victory wasn't saving the house. It wasn't proving Ethan wrong. It wasn't hearing the apology. It was standing in that courtroom as the attorney who could have turned away and choosing not to. They disowned me over a lie. 5 years later, I was the only person capable of protecting what they had left. I walked back into my office that evening, closed the door, and allowed myself a long breath. Not of relief, but of closure. They believed I stole from Grandma. They erased me without question. But in the end, they needed the daughter they once threw away. And this time, I didn't need them to believe me. My work had already spoken.